It is Behr Paint Week on the Paint People channel, and that means we're going to look at some Behr paint colors, starting with Bakery Box. And today's episode of Color Quickie is all about Bakery Box, as well as some other colors that go really well with it. So if you're interested in learning about paint colors and other paint colors that go with them, then stick around, press that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get into it. So to start things off, Bakery Box, if you haven't noticed, it's not much of a color at all, is it? It is one of the off-white paint colors that exist, but I would argue it's pretty much a white. I don't see that very often because most paint colors that get called white are off-white because they have a bit of beige, a bit of gray, a bit of brown, whatever the case may be. And in this case, you could say that Bakery Box is a white that has maybe a dash of blue, like a very, very light pale blue, maybe a tiny bit of gray as well. But it is so subtle, so slight, that it's not enough to really turn down the brightness of this color whatsoever. Because that's what happens with white colors. Sometimes when you add some colorant to it, its LRV, or its light reflectance value, goes down as it gets darker and darker and darker. But Bakery Box sits at a 90 LRV, which is extremely bright. Definitely in that top tier brightness-wise for all paint colors, even whites. I would definitely call this a white paint color that you can use on things like doors, trim, ceilings, walls, maybe in some cases if you want something extremely bright, but I tend to avoid going super bright on the walls, mainly for practical reasons. Just coverage is an issue sometimes. But if you ever need a white and you need something really crisp and bright, Bakery Box is all right. The ways that I would use this paint color would probably be off of the walls. So if I wanted a really bright white accent piece, like a piece of furniture or a chair that I want just to pop against maybe an otherwise darker backdrop, if I was looking for a cooler leaning trim color, maybe I'm leaning into a more cool, sleek, contemporary grayscale aesthetic. A color like Bakery Box will really pop and contrast most other colors depending on how light or dark they are. Probably not my first choice in terms of a wall color, but you could still technically do it. Just be aware that bright whites are notoriously difficult to work with. In terms of exterior colors, this is one I might avoid, believe it or not, because not only is it going to be extremely bright when exposed to the sun, but the blue aspect is going to be that much more accentuated. So if you're not aware, sunlight, it's actually kind of blue. It's cooler light. So that blue aspect in Bakery Box will just be that much more enhanced, which could be a bit overwhelming. In small pockets on things like trim, it could still work, but I would personally lean towards the more warm side of things. Even something like Polar Bear, which is still very bright, but just a tiny bit warmer. Okay, so now let's talk about trim colors. What are some other colors that go really well with Bakery Box? Well, if you want something that's whiter and brighter, the only one you can really pick is Ultra Pure White. And this is Behr's brightest white that they make. Beautiful, it's clean, it's simple, and it has a 94 LRV. Really not too much of a difference in terms of brightness, but it technically is brighter, and it's also a little more neutral and clean, not nearly as blue leaning. Now, what about a darker trim color to really contrast with Bakery Box? Well, my choice is Calligraphy, and Behr describes it as an inky blue, which I think is a really great way of saying a shaded blue. So not very vibrant, but it is saturated with a mixture of black and blue. It's leaning into the little bit of blue found in Bakery Box, but because there's obviously a lot more depth here, it's going to be way more apparent, and the two are going to coordinate pretty easily. Okay, so let's get into some color pairings. We have three choices, three options for perhaps other wall colors in your home. The first one being Solemn Silence. And if you haven't noticed, yes, this is a neutral. This is lighter, has a bit of gray, but it also has this touch of a foggy blue undertone that really goes in line with the other colors in this video. It has a 68 LRV, so even though it looks light, it's kind of on that lighter mid-tone sort of area where there's going to be a lot of contrast against a white like Bakery Box. This could be a perfect choice as a wall color. Bakery Box could be an alternative trim color if you don't want to go with the ultra pure white. A little more monochromatic, a little more of just a blue lean altogether, but I think that kind of looks nice. Not something that's used super often nowadays because there's a little more of a bias towards the warmer neutrals, but if you wanted something cooler, this would probably be my choice. Now, next up, we have a neutral that is a bit warmer leaning, in case you wanted to incorporate that as well, and it's simply called Dove by Behr. And this is your classic grayish, a little warmer leaning combination of beige and gray. That's a 66 LRV, so right around that same sort of zone as the last color. But like I said, this is going to be a warmer color. So if you have a space that has a lot more warmth in terms of your flooring or your furniture, your decor in general, then this might be a better fit in those spaces. Or you can even use it as the main color if you want the majority of your home to be that warmer lean, then this could be a good color to do that without being super different from the blue undertone colors we've discussed earlier. You can just tweak the dial a little bit, whether you want to favor Solemn Silence or Dove as your main color, and then have the other colors sort of be the support. Now, the third color pairing is sort of transitional. Overall, it's a little more of a cooler color, but it does have a warm undertone to it, which I think is really nice. It's called Dusty Olive. We've now moved away from blue and we've reached green. One of my favorite hues altogether. Dusty Olive does a couple things. It brings in some depth because its LRV is 31, so very low, much lower than all the other colors we talked about, minus calligraphy. It also brings in a little bit of this earthiness, this organic quality, maybe a bit of brown too. Like, it has this complexity to it that also still feels natural and organic, which not a lot of the other colors really do because they have that cooler lean, that bit of a gray emphasis. This color brings in some life, which I think is really, really needed, and it just sets the palette off in a beautiful way. Speaking of the palette, here it is all together. Let me know what you think. We also have our Patreon, which is growing every single week. We have exclusive content every single Sunday, and if you're a Prime member, you get access to your own personalized mini color palette from me every quarter. And also a fun little note, we've added color palettes for sale now, which are fully fleshed out 12 color palettes. So twice as much as you'd get in a color quickie. You can check them out on our Patreon as well. Links are down in the description, and here is another video for you.